With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Could apply for federal grants to turn those tracks into recreational biking paths, walking paths, running paths, and they didn't do it. And from that day on, I said, the mayor really affects people's lives. And I've watched Mayor Bright. I've become friends with him and especially his wife, who's fabulous, and Mayor Strange. And I've been on boards, the Montgomery City County Library Board. I've been on the Lagoon Park Trail Board, and I've had a lot of interaction with the underbelly of what goes on behind a city to give you a great city, and I understand that. So I'm sitting at the polling place with my son. He just turned 18, and it's his first time to vote, and I'm shaking hands. I know everybody in line, and he said, "Dad, you should run for mayor." And I said, I'm basically the mayor anyway. Do I really need the title? And then we start looking at the candidates, and with Mayor Strange retiring, it might be the best time for me to run is right now while there's an open seat and you don't have to run against an incumbent.
Well, I mean, from a political standpoint, that certainly makes sense. What kind of change would you want to affect? Because one of the things that you just mentioned is that you realize that here on the local level, the mayor has an impact on people in their day-to-day life. And I think that that's certainly true, and that's the way that our country was designed, is that people at the local level are supposed to have more influence over the day-to-day operations than people at the higher levels. And so what is it about that role specifically that just kind of draws you to it, and what kind of things would you like to see done?
I motivate people. I run the Ultimate Frisbee League in town, and I mentor some other attorneys, and I'm an Army reservist. And so I have a lot of leadership and motivational skills. And I have two boys who are both in college and doing really well. I think as a mayor, the bully pulpit is the largest asset that you have. Is, if you've noticed, my slogan is Montgomery Proud. I get sick and tired of people saying, "Oh, I guess I live in Montgomery. It's awful, and let's go somewhere else." I think we have a lot of assets. We have a lot of jobs. We have a lot of good things going on. So the first thing, the overriding thing, is a spirit of we're proud of where we live. That's the first thing. Then there's specific things that I want to do. Everybody is working on downtown. I would like to continue what they're doing. I saw something going on about demolishing old buildings, finding those and demolishing. Great. The great thing about not running against an incumbent is I want to do the things Todd Strange did. I think he did a fabulous job with the business, attracting business, getting the infrastructure in to attract the business, doing that. But there's some parts of the city that are not being addressed in that. And we can continue what we've done in East Chase and what we've done on the boulevard, too. I think the Eastern Boulevard has picked up some new businesses. And the downtown, and take those to West Montgomery, take those to Midtown and some other places like that. So I want to take what Mayor Strange has done and expand on it with energy and with pride.
Okay, so what strategy specifically would you use? Because, I think that, like you said, a couple of things that you cited, the downtown area and East Chase are certainly doing well. What strategies would you use to kind of mirror that in West Montgomery? Is that something that even can be done?
It's the most difficult thing. I mean, downtown, there's some things you can do to beautify it, and there's businesses. Tax breaks are always a big thing. If you look on the Western Boulevard, there's some new fast food restaurants. All of them have tax abatements. Sales tax abatements based on your construction. Those are things that you can continue to do to give people the tax incentive. You can redo the roads out there so they have good roads to go to. You can provide security, get the police to monitor those areas more efficiently. So those are things that you can do to take the economic growth that we have in downtown, and what I'd like to do is not just pick a spot over there, is just start where we're doing well and just move out from there until we get to the West Montgomery. And if there's specific spots, I know up on 5 Points has the infrastructure built. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see that grow into something to help the Cottage Hills area, and then we can take that further and further west. Maxwell Boulevard is a great example. We have Powder Magazine Park that needs to be finished to get to the river. And honestly, I'd like, but on that, a Air Force Museum to show that Montgomery, where Maxwell is where the first flight school was ever created by the Wright brothers. We should have a museum. And it should be outside the base. Like in Columbus, they have the infantry museum right outside of whatever the name of the base is. I've been there. As Army Reserves, I've been there, but I forget the name of the base. But we should have that same museum type there to attract people from the military people that are coming through and the people that are interested in military coming through up the 65-85 corridor.
So one thing that I wanted to ask you about and kind of zero in on it sounds like you are a fan of at least some of Mayor Strange's policies when it came to things like getting incentives for taxes with businesses. What are some of the ways that you want to draw? Are you a fan of the kind of economic development strategies that Todd Strange used, and that's kind of the model you want to follow?
It is. I have not delved into every single tax strategy that we've had. I've looked at it. I read the paper. I look at what's out there, and I've represented some businesses that have had that, have taken advantage of that. So I know. I don't know every detail in there, but overall, yes, I want to take the strategy that he's taken and expand it and do it with my energy and my motivational skills.
Okay, so let's say that you do win the mayor.
You mean win?
Race. Yeah, let's say that you win. Okay. let's say that you wind up becoming mayor. What issue would you want to tackle on day one? What would be your agenda the first day in office?
I haven't thought about that. Yeah, one of my pet projects is One Court Square.
Okay.
One Court Square, we have to address it. It bookends the state capitol, and I've been in it several times. I've had jobs in there. Our wedding reception was in there when it was the Capital City Club.
Mm-hmm.
It is a mess. It's cut up. It's moldy. It's ugly, the parking structure, and I have some ideas about making it a park. There's a lot to do to get that, but it needs either the developer, which are great people. I know a lot of people that have worked for them, and they're good people, and we need to work with them to turn that into the jewel of downtown. And in my opinion, it should be a park, and it would show off the federal courthouse, with the Frank Johnson courthouse, where all the civil rights cases were heard. It would be addition by subtraction, because we would take away that, and everything around it would improve. The lofts, they don't have anywhere to go, for recreation, and the lofts that are being built in the old Bell Building, if they were overlooking a park, and I got the idea from Mobile. Mobile has a lot of pocket parks, and Bryant Park in New York City. These are parks that just bring green space, and that pride in Montgomery, that would be the first thing I would address. I couldn't tackle it first because it's a huge deal,
Right.
But that would be my first thing to talk about at my first city
The first
council
project
meeting.
you'd want to start on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. Well, one thing that I wanted to ask too, and this, I've been in radio here for about 4 years now, and there's two topics that almost always come up every time you're talking about the problems in Montgomery, and one of them is police presence.
Right.
And how the police force is being run. We do have a problem with crime in the city. What would you do to try to improve the status of lowering the crime rate and being able to do something about, not even necessarily spending more money, but certainly figuring out ways to make our police force function more efficiently?
Right. I'm not a politician. I've never ran for office. So I'm going to say probably not the political answer that everybody wants. You can't eradicate crime. Everybody running for office says, I'm going to get rid of crime. I heard one person say, once and for all, we're going to get rid of crime. And I'm like, I don't think you can do that. It's just preposterous to say once and for all, we're going to take care of crime. Art Baylor, when he used to be the police chief, said, Michael, there are 10% of people that just want to do bad. And you can't get them to do right. If you have 100,000 people, I'm bad at math, that's 1,000 people.
Right.
If you have 300,000 people, then that's 3,000 people. And everybody will say, well, crime is on the rise. Percentage-wise, numbers-wise, yes. Percentage-wise, it's not. So how would I tackle that? First of all, judicial reform. I want to look at the laws and see the ones that bring us the most safety. Breaking and entering, guns, illegal guns, things like that. Those are the ones that we need to enforce the most.
Okay.
Then we want to take some that are the least offensive. And I don't have a list of those. But the ones that are we using our resources most efficiently to create the peace that we're looking for. And so I would look at judicial reform, and I would look at the police department. The third thing I would do is police training.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest concern for me is to have a shooting like Ferguson, and man, these police officers have the toughest job of any of us. They go and a regular traffic stop, they don't know if they're going to get shot or not. Are they properly trained to handle these tough situations that don't kill people, that don't injure people unnecessarily? Sometimes you're going to have to pull your firearm, and you're going to have to take somebody out who's causing a nuisance, causing imminent harm to other people. You're going to have to do that sometimes. Very, very rarely.
Well, that's why we give them weapons in the first place, is because we know there will be occasions where they have to use them.
Exactly. I've been through a lot of Army training, a lot of combat training. I'm a JAG officer, so I don't go into combat. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But rules of engagement is, I've taught the rules of engagement course in the military at one unit twice every year for 3 years. So I understand what the Army does for rules of engagement. And when the MPs and the infantry, the way they're trained to handle combat situations and prisoners of war situation, these type of things, do our police officers have that training? I don't know the answer at this point, but under my leadership, they will be the best trained officers that in the nation. So
to summarize, what you're looking at is first judicial review to try to get, I guess, steeper penalties for some of the crimes you're talking about, violent crimes, property crimes, and then second of all, take a look and review what the training policies are, and if they're not up to par, need to tighten the screws there.
And my third policy is, again, Montgomery Proud. Mm-hmm. I believe that if you have an education, I know you're going to talk about education
That was
next.
The second issue I was about to bring up.
If you have a good education, if you have a job, and you're proud of your city, you are less likely to commit crimes. Now, are we going to take that 10% and turn them into angels? No. And anybody that says that we are, they're not. I mean, it's impossible to do. But we're going to take the next 15% of people, and we're going to give them so much pride in being a Montgomeryan that they are going to police. They are going to help to make the place. They're going to pick up trash. When we see trash, we pick it up. And we need people to do that. You see trash down the road, you go and pick it up. If you see somebody about to commit a crime or committing crimes, you're going to tell the police. You're going to stop them. You're going to say something because you're proud of where you are. And I know that's a soft answer and it's not specific, and how do you measure that? I understand all that. But you have to have somebody out there saying, this is a great place to live. If all the good people come together and say, this is a great place to live, people will believe it, and then people will not commit as many crimes.
Well, I do think that there's something to be said by the starting with the concept and then implementing it, because when it came to Mayor Giuliani, of course, one of the ways that he really improved New York City while he was mayor is he kind of subscribed to the broken glass theory. And so his idea was, if you clean up the city, then people will take more pride in it, and then they will be less likely, not, completely eliminate it, but less likely to be disrespectful to the place that they live.
I agree completely.
And so I do think that there's some value for sure in getting the right idea first and then figuring out how to implement it. But since you already predicted essentially what the next question was going to be.
Every interview is education.
Oh, I'm sure. You've probably done enough of these already now that you know that that's coming. But, when it comes to the state takeover,
right.
A, do you think that was something that has thus far been beneficial? And B, do you think that there's anything that you would be able to do as mayor to sort of get the Montgomery school system back to fighting strength?
I'm going to answer your second question first.
Okay, go ahead.
The mayor has very little to do with the education system. Anybody who's running on I'm going to fix education will have to completely overhaul the system. And it would be 100% of your time doing that. I understand, as being the mayor, looking at the books, talking to everybody involved, is that the mayor only holds the purse strings. Mayor Strange was at my Kiwanis Club the other day, and he said, the thing I regret is not using my bully pulpit enough to motivate, and I might quote him wrong if he's listening. I might have the quote wrong, but he used bully pulpit. And to motivate our schools and to get them to reach higher standards. Now, he cannot go in there and say, I want to fire this principal. I want to change this curriculum. You can't do it. Anybody who thinks they can, a mayor can do that, doesn't understand how the mayor's office works.
Yeah,
Which
he has no authority in that area.
None. They provide police presence. And Mayor Bright the other day told me that the city paid for, not Lanier, Carver. And I haven't looked, but I trust that he would steer me right. And so the city can provide money for facilities and for police presence. What I can do is use the bully pulpit and the motivational tools. And here's how I would do that. I think workforce development and financial literacy. I'm a bankruptcy attorney, and I see people that have advanced degrees and don't know how to balance a checkbook, don't understand interest, don't understand how our tax code works. The IRS works, nobody understands.
I was about to say nobody understands the tax code.
Just general basic things. So what I would do is I would talk to the school boards new, and so I would talk to them and say, as the mayor, here's what we need for employment. We need workforce. I was in the Alabama Bar Leadership Forum, and we went all over the state that year and looking at what was working. And one of the things we looked at is welding programs. These high school kids were coming out of school with welding degrees, with heavy machine operating degrees. You can make a lot of money with these type of skills.
Yeah, I'm the son of an ag teacher, so I understand
exactly.
vocational education for sure.
Vocational education. I can't make a school do it, but I can tell them I don't need everyone to go to college. I need people that are smart, conscientious, and have a skill or are willing to go to a trade school and learn a skill. That's what I need. I need people that know how to balance a checkbook, how to make change as a cashier. Everybody has value. Just because you aren't the CEO of a company or an attorney or a doctor doesn't mean that you're not important to this city. I'll go off a little bit on a tangent. I define success as taking what God's given you and making the most of it. All of us start at a different point in life. I always use George W. Bush. He started, his dad was the CIA director and vice president. He started differently than I did. I went to public school. I was on free lunch. And so I'm not as worldly successful as him on paper.
Sure.
But I've taken what God has given me and made the most of it. And that's what we need to do, is tell everybody that you are important. And just because you're laying bricks and you're a plumber, that's an important job. And
well, believe me, the doctors and lawyers really appreciate the people that do the plumbing and the bricks because they don't know how to do it.
No, they don't. I don't. I'm going to hire somebody.
I'm in that boat too, believe me.
So I can influence and work with the schools to get vocational education, workforce readiness, financial literacy, and we can work together. I'm a team player. I do Chapter 11 reorganizations, and I am not a prima donna who goes in and says, this is how we're doing it. I'm like, all right, let's work together. Let's get this done.
Okay, so my last really big question about this, and it may not have you may not have a solid answer on this because it's so new, but of course you know that Governor Ivey's tax bill just went through on gasoline, and that there is a certain percentage of the revenue that comes from that is going to go to local and city governments for infrastructure. How would you make sure that the city of Montgomery gets their fair share in that, and also what would you spend it on if you had that infrastructure spending? What area needs it the most?
There's two things. One is, how do we make sure we get our fair share? I will fight to the end to make sure that a formula is created. It's probably already created based on citizens, based on roads, based on where it comes from, and make sure that's implemented correctly. I hope, and I haven't looked, but there, and I've talked to county commissioners and the government liaison who works with the County Commission Association, and he said there's a formula. You know, for every penny that comes, there's a formula. So you get that. I believe that formulas work better because you take out some of the
subjectivity
and preferences. Is the good old boy system. We take out the good old boy system by having formulas.
Sure.
There is a formula so that's the first thing, is make sure there's a formula. And if I can get in on the good old boy system to benefit Montgomery, I'm going to do that for myself. And if we take money away from Birmingham, we're going to do that because we're Montgomery proud. I'm going to say Montgomery proud about 1,000 times as we talk. We will do that. But the second thing is there's a formula. I've talked to the road people and the people who make these decisions. They have somebody that goes in and evaluates every road in Montgomery. And they put numbers on those roads of quality, use. It's a formula of how bad is this road. And then they rate those. And it is, okay, let's just call it on a scale of 1 to 10. This road is a 10. They're redoing Vaughn Road out near my house. And right. When it gets done, it's going to be a 10. So what we do is we start with the ones. And the worst road in Montgomery gets paved.
So no matter where it is, what side of town it's on, whichever one is in most need, that's the one.
And the formula based on use, too. If there's a road out that nobody's ever used and it's in bad shape, well, there's a part of the formula is amount of use is on there. So whatever has the lowest rating gets done first. If my friend who lives over and the day I announced I was going to run for mayor, I've had 10 people, you're going to get my road paved. And I'm not. I'm going to tell you, I'm not paving your road unless it is the one on the bottom. I'm not going to play favorites on roads. I'm going to use the formula, and we're going to get those roads paved until we get all of them up to a 10.
Okay. Well, let's say that there's somebody out there watching that's really interested in your campaign, wants to support you, either donations, time, whatever, or just want to learn more about you. How would they do that? Right.
I thought we needed a website, and my advisor says, no, everybody just uses Facebook. So Michael Fritz for Mayor on Facebook is the best way, and it's also on Instagram that way. I'll give you my cell phone number, 334-300-0598. Text me, call me. I love text. I'm a big text fan. Text me. We will get you involved. We have, a lot of people, since I'm one of the last ones to get in, I have an infrastructure of how we're going to win this race. I'm a moderate, and by moderate, I mean I think reasonably. I look at every issue. I want to be fair to everybody. I want to do things like a business person would do and a caring, concerned citizen would do, and not like somebody who's beholden to a political party. So 334-300-0598 or Michael Fritz for Mayor on Instagram or Facebook.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Michael Fritz. He's running for mayor here in the city of Montgomery. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Kellen.
All right. We'll go to a break, and we'll be back in just a little bit right here on Tactics.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now it's time once again for another reading of the SJW Bible. Today's story is going to be about how Naaman was cured of his leprosy in 2 Kings, chapter 5, verses 8 through 14. And it says, "It happened when Elisha, the man and or woman of God, depending on how he identified at the time, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horse and his chariots, which were sustainably raised and emitted no greenhouse gases, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. Not that I'm implying that you were dirty just because you were a leper. That would be leper shaming. But Naaman was furious and went away, saying, Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Paphra and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him, saying, Wow, that Elisha guy is such a xenophobic jerk. Where does he get off implying that the rivers in Israel are better than the rivers in our country? That nationalist jerk probably believes in Israeli exceptionalism too. So then God spoke to Naaman directly and said, Naaman, I am so sorry for being intolerant and not accommodating enough. I should never have asked you to have to go and do something to be cured. You believe in me, and since purification comes from faith only, I'll just go ahead and heal you right here and now. And from that hour forward, his flesh was cured, and they all went out to try some local craft beer. Wow, so inspirational. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth. Welcome back, everybody. So glad that you were able to stay with us through the break. And I got to tell you, great to have guests. I've been trying to get more guests in here. We do have a lot to cover right now, and we have, unfortunately, very little time to do it. I got church at 6:30, so I need to mosey on out of here pretty quickly. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the biggest national story of the day, and we're going to get back to some more local news tomorrow, but I mean, this story was just so huge that I wanted to cover it because I think that it's bigger because it just speaks to where our culture is, and unfortunately the commentary is that it's not great. And it really does go back to Jesse Smollett's charges being lifted the other day, for those of you who didn't know about that. So, to be clear, and we want to be correct on a technical level, it's technically not an exoneration, but it certainly feels like it. And the reason that it feels like it is he has to surrender his bail, which was $10,000, which means that when he was bailed out, he just doesn't get that money back. And he still has to serve 16 hours of community service. But no formal apology. And according to the mayor, and we'll get to his commentary in just a second, the cost that was put on the police department in the city of Chicago was so great, far greater than the $10,000, so the city of Chicago really winds up losing on this level. And 16 hours, I was really surprised that the number was so low, because 16 hours, I mean, literally you could easily knock that out in 2 8-hour workdays. It just amazes me that he wound up getting so very little on this. Now, I'm not one of these people that thinks that we should be storming his house with a torch and pitchfork, and I'm not going to be satisfied until he's in prison or something like that. That's not what I'm saying, but let's be honest, especially considering the cost to the Chicago Police Department. This is a gross mishandling of justice in several ways. First of all, there should have been a much steeper fine. And second of all, the community service hours, something there, maybe some probation as well. I'm not even necessarily saying that he needs to do hard time or anything like that, but we need to do something because, especially with this case that's on such a big platform, and I'm not suggesting they go hard on him because he happens to be a famous person. I'm just saying that there is going to be a societal effect because of this, and we need to be aware of that. Because there are going to be people that see this case and think that hate crime hoaxes are really not a big deal because, I mean, Jesse Smollett, he got away with it and he's fine. And a lot of the people on the left are actually treating this as though it is an exoneration, which is hilarious on a number of levels. But part of the reason that I'm saying that is there was a tweet from Fox, and those are the people that run his show, Empire, that he was on. That's what he's famous for. He's an actor. They were suggesting that he may wind up coming back to the show, and he and his attorney are acting as though this is an exoneration, even though it clearly is not. And that's not just my opinion. If you're looking at what the attorney general said, if you're looking at what the president, or I think chairman is his actual title, but the chairman for the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago, he said very emphatically, this is not an exoneration. This is not saying that he's innocent. We don't believe that he's innocent. This is just the way the legal system saw fit to deal with this, which kind of suggested that he wasn't real happy with the way that this whole thing wound up shaking out. So Kim Foxx, who is the attorney general who is dropping the charges on Jussie Smollett, she actually, it turns out, was someone who had previously recused herself on this case, and then I guess retroactively decided, no, I'm not recused, and then came in and quashed this case and took out the charges, which that by itself, even if you didn't know anything about the case, let's say we had no evidence, we didn't know anything about what had happened with the case, if that was all we knew, that in and of itself would be highly suspicious. That a person, a law enforcement official that had previously recused themselves because of personal connection to the case, all of a sudden said, nope, you know what, I'm unrecused now. And now I'm going to, by the way, drop the charges on this case. You're the one that recused yourself because you had a personal connection to the alleged criminal. And now you're just saying, no. It's just, it blows my mind how there are some people that seem to not have a problem with this. And communications also revealed that Smollett had a relative working for Michelle Obama that was sort of negotiating this whole thing, trying to get the charges dropped. So this is a case of somebody, in the case of Jussie Smollett, that is very well connected, that has friends and relatives in high places, and is himself a high-profile figure. And when these very serious charges get brought up against him, he gets a call to the people that he's connected to, who happen to be good friends with the Obamas, and he himself is also friends with the Obamas, and they wind up getting the charges dropped. I mean, this just reeks to high heaven of corruption, and the reason that it reeks of corruption is because we can find out it actually is corruption. We actually have the paper trail in this particular case of the communications that went back and forth between his relative and people connected with the Obamas and Kim Foxx that essentially said, look, we know he did something wrong, but can you just kind of give him a little bitty slap on the wrist and move on? And that seems to be exactly what wound up happening. So let's recap on this case very quickly, just to remind you of all the evidence. I'm somebody that tends to be a little bit timid when it comes to verdicts. I'm not a Nancy Grace figure that kind of makes up their mind very early on and has sort of a direction that I try to lean on these things, especially when it comes to criminal investigations. If I don't know the evidence, I tend to be really hesitant to say what did happen and what didn't happen. I'm telling you, in this case, it is incredibly clear what happened. The evidence against this guy is massive and very, very convincing. So, first of all, we know that Smollett committed mail fraud, which is a federal crime, to mail a hate letter to himself, and then went out talking about it and talking about how his life was in danger because he was getting hate mail, even though we found out later he's the one that wrote the letter and then sent it to himself. So you've already... And then we have the check that he signed to the two Nigerian brothers who were his personal trainers. We have the check that he signed to pay them for their services, and by their services I mean they were going out and committing this quote-unquote hate crime against him so that it would look convincing. We have the check of it that he paid them to do that with his signature on it. So we've already got this hate crime happened. And again, I'm using their definition of hate crime because I don't even believe hate crimes are a real thing, but nonetheless, this alleged racial crime takes place against him. We have the communication between him and the brothers. We at least have the records. We don't have the actual transcript so far as I know. Maybe the grand jury did, I'm not sure. but we in the public have the phone records that they were communicating with each other right before this happened. And we also have the witnesses themselves. The two brothers themselves admit to being paid to do this. They're the ones that said, yeah, we did this when called up as witnesses. And so the people that were engaged in this hoax, that were engaged in this conspiracy, are saying, yeah, we did it. And then you also have video footage of them buying the materials in the store beforehand. And maybe you could kind of see a case for this, that these were just two people that were connected to him, but I don't know, disguised themselves when this took place and wanted to go out and do some kind of harm to him, if it weren't for the check that he paid them to do this. And it's really hard, and I know that this is going to sound racially insensitive, doesn't matter, it's the truth, I'm saying it. It's really hard to confuse a white person and a Nigerian. I don't think that should be a controversial thing to bring up, but there's just not a lot of Trump supporters, big burly redneck white guys in MAGA hats that you're going to confuse for a pair of Nigerians. And so that's another thing that is suspicious. If he had come back and said, well, maybe they were shouting racial slurs and ethnic slurs and slurs against homosexuals at me, and that had been the end of it, maybe you could kind of see that these brothers did this and weren't on his payroll for this. But he's saying all this, and including the racial slurs, despite the fact that they're black too. And he's alleging that all this happened despite the fact that it's really hard to confuse a white person and a black person. Even if it's really dark, even if it's a crime, and, you know, you're under trauma and all that. You can mess up a lot of things when it comes to witness descriptions of what people look like, and that happens in crimes all the time. Doesn't really happen when it's a white guy and a black guy too often. Not something that's real easy to screw up, especially when you're talking about two of them. So that also is pretty solid evidence against Jussie Smollett's story. And another thing too, even if you didn't have all this evidence, the story itself makes no sense. Even if you didn't have the evidence, you didn't have the check, you didn't know who the alleged perpetrators were and that they were a couple of black guys from Nigeria that were personal trainers, even take all of that away, the initial story still doesn't make sense. That this guy, an actor, decides at 2 a.m. on a freezing cold polar vortex kind of night in Chicago, where the temperature was well below freezing to the point that the bleach that he was alleging was used in this would have been frozen. That's how cold it was. That he's saying that on this night he decided, I'm going to go out and get a Subway sandwich. And then after the attack, when he still has the noose around his neck, which magically still stayed around his neck throughout this whole ordeal, even though he didn't have any marks on his neck and no bruising, so that again is another thing that doesn't really add up, that when he reports to police, he still has a sandwich. That to me is another thing that seems highly unlikely, and here's why. I like Subway as much as the next guy. I like sandwiches. They're fine. But he's asking us to believe one of two things. Either he got the Subway sandwich before he was attacked, and despite being brutally attacked and having a noose put around his neck and being beat up and having bleach poured on him, somehow he hung on to his sandwich the whole time. Yeah, I mean, he's probably in fear of his life if this were real. He's in fear of his life that these racist wearing MAGA hats are going to kill him, yet somehow he never lets go of his sub. Or, and this is the other scenario, which is just as unlikely, he's attacked before he gets a Subway sandwich, and then after being, having this horrible traumatic event happen to him, he decides, oh man, I gotta tell the police. I should get some Subway first though. I'm really craving an Italian meatball sub. I mean, it's just so absurd. Even looking at the story itself without having all the mountain of evidence against him, you should. because there's no other motive that makes sense. He wanted to further his career, and he wanted to disparage everybody that voted for Trump and happens to have white skin. That seems to be the motive when it comes to this. There's really not another one that makes any sense. It's not just conservatives. I mean, yes, we're talking about this too, but it's not just guys like me and Ben Shapiro and Glenn Beck and, Andrew Wilkow and other guys on 1440, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity. It's not just us talking about this. It's not just us saying it's incredibly clear that he was perpetrating a hate crime hoax. There's actually quite a few people on the left that are talking about this as well. And if you don't believe me, you need look no further than David Axelrod. And David Axelrod tweets out the other day, unless some better explanation surfaces, here's the lesson of this weird turn in the Jussie Smollett case. You can contrive a hate crime, make it national news, get caught, and if you are well-connected celebrity, get off for $10,000 and have your record expunged and the file sealed. Now, David Axelrod is not exactly a conservative. This is a guy who was an advisor for President Obama and had worked for the Clintons before. He had worked for several Democrats, lifelong Democrat. David Axelrod is not a conservative figure. And yet here he is coming on and saying, well, it seems to me that the lesson of this is if you're well connected enough, then you can perpetrate a hate crime hoax and walk off not scot-free, but basically scot-free. And, I mean, David Axelrod, weird as it is to say this, is right. Not somebody that's motivated because he hates black people or hates gay people or he's conservative or he is trying to cover for President Trump or anything crazy like that. This is David Axelrod saying, yeah, the lesson here is that as long as you're wealthy and well-connected, you don't really have to worry about breaking laws all that too much. And what's really sad is that he's right. And by the way, he's not the only person on the left that's talking about this. Let's go to another person that was close to President Barack Obama. Let's go to his chief of staff, who is now currently the mayor of the city of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel.
And the ethical cost is you have, as a person who was in the House of Representatives when we tried to pass the Shepard legislation that dealt with hate crimes, putting them on the books, that President Obama then signed into law, to then use those very laws and the principles and values behind the Matthew Shepard hate crimes legislation to self-promote your career is a cost that comes to all the individuals, gay men and women, who will come forward and one day say they were a victim of a hate crime who now will be doubted. People of faith, Muslim or any other religious faith, who will be a victim of hate crimes. People that of all walks of life and backgrounds, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Now this casts a shadow of whether they're telling the truth, and he did this all in the name of self-promotion. And he used the laws of the hate crime legislation that all of us collectively over years have put on the books to stand up to be the values that embody what we believe in. This is a whitewash of justice. A grand jury could not have been clearer. To then say not only is the cost, the $10,000 doesn't come cost financially, but all the other repercussions of this decision it made, to me, where is the accountability in the system?
All right, so there you have it. Rahm Emanuel saying, and keep in mind, I want you to listen to his motive. This is somebody that really believes that hate crime laws should be taken seriously, that hate crime should be on the books. I don't. I think that violence against people is illegal. Therefore, we don't need to make it extra super duper illegal just because one person happens to have one skin color or the other. But without getting into all that, my point in all of that is Rahm Emanuel and I are not exactly political allies, nor am I and David Axelrod. But Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff for President Obama before he became the mayor of Chicago, here he is saying, look, we worked really hard on these hate crime laws, and for Jussie Smollett to spit in the face of that and basically craft and create a hate crime to bolster his own career is sickening. And Rahm Emanuel is exactly right, which is so weird to say on this particular program that I, as a super duper conservative, am saying, yep, I agree with David Axelrod and I agree with Rahm Emanuel. That ought to be a pretty big tell that the evidence is very conclusive that Jussie Smollett completely fabricated this entire thing. And yet, there are people on the left that are still convinced and still trying to convince others that this is murky, it's a mystery, we can't figure it out, we're not really sure, maybe he did it, maybe he didn't. And the only reason, it's abundantly transparent. The only reason that they are taking that stance is because they want the hate crime to be true. I think Babylon Bee actually put it the best, and for those of you who don't know, Babylon Bee is a satire site that does news from sort of a Christian conservative perspective, but they're doing joke news stories, and so because of that, they did one right after the news broke that the hate crime was completely made up when the grand jury came out with their findings. And the results of that were, according to the Babylon Bee, that liberals are incredibly upset that a hate crime didn't happen, which is framing it correctly. It is weird that people that claim to really care about minorities and care about homosexuals and people of ethnic minorities and that kind of thing, that they're the ones saying, I really wish this were true. And why is that? Because it fits the narrative. See, the thing is, the demand, let's just go straight to economics. The problem is the demand for hate crimes is not there. Or the demand is there, the supply is not. So the demand for a hate crime is far, far higher than the current supply is, because hate crimes, again, using the definition that the left would use, crimes against somebody because of their race, because of their sexual orientation, because of their religion, whatever, they happen, and they're horrible when they happen, but they're rare. And if you were watching the media and watching their hysteria, especially since Donald Trump has got elected, they would love nothing more than to have a new hate crime perpetrated so that they could report on it and talk about how terrible Donald Trump is and how horrible the country is now that he's president. They would love if that happened every single day. If they could just somehow magically make that take place so that they could use it as a club to bash conservatives over the head. Even though, again, conservatives are not typically the ones that would even be engaged in such a thing. Because they believe that it suits their political narrative, that it suits their political ends, they would be perfectly content with having new hate crimes to report on all the time. But because there is a really high demand, and because there is very little supply, what they're doing is they're trying to counterfeit, they're trying to drum up imaginary hate crimes. We've seen it with Jussie Smollett, we've seen it across in much smaller cases. We've seen it with people defacing property, we've seen it with the poop swastika, we've seen these kind of hoaxes all the time on college campuses. And so there are all these people trying to fabricate these imaginary hate crimes against them so that they get to play victim, so that they get to draw the sympathy. And in Jussie Smollett's case, and most of the cases of hoaxes that have happened that we've seen before, nothing happens. And it's frustrating, and it drives you up a wall. But these people engage in fake crimes and waste time and resources that would really be helping people that need the services of the police and that kind of thing, and usually nothing happens. Now, granted, with Jussie Smollett, it did cost him $10,000, but that's still not, very much considering the amount of money that was expended and the amount of time that was expended for the Chicago Police Department investigating his crime. And so it is a real mishandling of justice. And despite this, there are still people in the media, there are still people on the left that do not want you asking questions, and they want to perpetrate this idea that the whole thing is a mystery. We go now to CNN's Brian Stelter.
So far, no comment from the network, but I do think we will see Smollett get back to work because the narrative is once again changed from victim, to villain, back to victim. It's been very confusing, as Ryan was saying. People don't know what to believe, and we may never really know what happened on the street that night in Chicago.
You're a former
So there, Brian Stelter just, we don't know. We have no idea. And that's what's so incredibly frustrating about this whole thing. Brian Stelter acting as though, well, we're just not sure. We can't figure out what the answers are. First of all, you're a journalist. Finding things out is your job. And sometimes you don't have information available to you. I get that. That's not the case in this one. I just laid out a very solid case of all the evidence against Jussie Smollett and him being a hate crime hoaxer. And yet Brian Stelter was just asking like, well, there's just no information there. We'll never know what happened. It's a mystery. Only we had Scooby-Doo and Shaggy and the gang to try to solve this one. I gotta tell you, a Hanna-Barbera cartoon would be far less ridiculous than the stuff that they're expecting us to swallow on this. Brian Stelter, who's supposed to be the pinnacle of journalism at the great CNN, the most trusted name in news. See, I guess their slogan of facts matter, well, unless we don't like what the facts are telling us, and then they don't really matter, or we'll just ignore them and pretend that we can't find the facts. That's what Brian Stelter is doing there. And it really does go back to the thing that I was saying just a second ago. The left desperately wants more hate crimes to be true, because they believe that it helps their narrative. And by the way, it's not just media personalities like Brian Stelter, it's also people in the Democrat Party, including senators that are running for president, like Kamala Harris.
You're a former prosecutor. You understand the law. What do you think about what happened to Jussie Smollett in Chicago today?
To be perfectly honest with you, Wolf, I'm completely confused. I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know the underlying evidence. I have, there's a sealed document, obviously. I don't know. I'm at a loss. I think we're going to have to leave it up to the judgment of the prosecutor. I think we should leave it up to the judgment of the police chief and the mayor, of course, to give us some better sense of what's going on. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if you're confused, all of us are confused. And you heard Mayor Rahm Emanuel. He's confused as well.
So there you have it. Kamala Harris, who is supposed to be some kind of hotshot prosecutor, somebody that's supposed to be really tough on crime because, that was her job back in California is to prosecute people. And on this, when there's a lot of evidence against the guy, she's saying, I'm just confused. I can't figure it out. How has she ever done any work in law enforcement if she can look at this case and be like, I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. Can't tell one way or the other. Kamala Harris is such a blatantly obvious Democrat shill who eats this social justice warrior stuff for breakfast, and being the intersectionality candidate herself, I mean, she is a black woman, obviously, and right now that stacks higher than anybody else in the Democrat field on the intersectionality scale. But because of that, and because she knows she has to pay homage to those people because she needs them in the election, and she knows that those same people that she's trying to draw the votes from really want Jussie Smollett to be right, and they really did want this hate crime to be perpetrated against him, she plays the part of somebody that just can't figure out what happened. We don't know. We'll never know. Oh, well, it's confusing. Kamala Harris just don't even apologize for it. They basically just say either, well, we're unsure now, or they just ignore it and hope that you forget about it. And we see this time and time again, and this is the reason that the average person just does not trust the media. This is a great example of the reason that they shouldn't. And the truth is, the left, the vast majority of them reserve their doubt, reserve their questioning for stories they don't like. And if you don't believe me, you need look no further than Monday. You don't have to go back to the 1960s or anything crazy like that. When we saw the reaction of the left, because of course the report came out over the weekend, Monday we really got to see everybody's reaction to it. When the stories came out that Trump was exonerated on all counts when it came to Russian collusion, and that there may have been some evidence that kind of led towards obstruction of justice, but nothing that rose to the criminal level, and that's what we found out from Bob Mueller's report, then all of a sudden there's lots of questioning. Then there's lots of doubt. Then, well, yeah, it's saying that he's innocent, but we don't know. We're going to have to keep digging. We need to keep investigating. We're going to stay on this. When it's Jussie Smollett and there's a mountain of evidence against him, we just don't know. We have no idea. We can't possibly figure it out. There's just not enough to go on. And so it's just so incredibly transparent what they're trying to do here. Because I want you to compare the reactions here. That Trump basically gets cleared of everything he has been accused of on one question, and at the very least said, we can't put anything together that shows any criminal obstruction of justice on the other question. And they're all still convinced, we showed you just Monday, of the different media personalities and people on the left going, yeah, but we know that he's really still, we know that he's guilty. We know it. We know it. We can't tell you how we know it. We just know it. And I mean, person after person after person doing this. And then when you've got a mountain of evidence showing that the guy is a criminal on Jussie Smollett, they're just saying, well, you know, could go either way. It's a toss-up. We're not sure. It's so infuriating. And another thing, too, I think that this is a great example of the reason that people get absolutely disgusted when people on the left and social justice warriors talk about privilege. Because this is a gay black man that got off on a crime that if I or just about anybody else in the country, with a handful of rare exceptions, had perpetrated it, I especially as a straight white Christian guy, if I had done something like this and wasted police resources, you better believe that I would be spending at least some time in jail. I mean, you better believe that I would have gotten a much steeper fine than this. If you had reversed it and this had been, say, during the Obama administration, and I claimed that two big black guys in Hope and Change shirts beat me up and used racial slurs against me, and it turns out I made the whole thing up and I was doing it to bolster my talk radio career, oh, you better believe that would be the end of my career that day. There would not be a company in this country that would pick me back up again. And you also better believe that I would be paying a lot more than $10,000 if that's what it cost. And so what's so infuriating here is that when you're talking about privilege, which means special rules for certain people, Jussie Smollett is the beneficiary of privilege. I think it helps him that he happens to be a gay black man because he ranks so high in the intersectionality scale for the left. In other words, because he has all these labels on him, then he must get a pass for certain things. And I think it also helps him that he's incredibly famous and well-connected. Because there's probably a lot of black people and gay people, and maybe even some gay black people, that not necessarily hate crime hoaxes, but when they get put under a microscope and they have committed a crime, they don't get people like Michelle Obama's buddies to call in and bail them out. And so Jussie Smollett is the epitome of privilege and the epitome of a one-sided justice system that favors him. All this junk that Black Lives Matter has tried to spread around for the past several years about how black people can't get a fair shake and the justice system is skewed, and if you have white skin, then you're basically presumed innocent, where black people are just presumed to be guilty. Yeah, well, this is a pretty clear case of a guy being given special consideration. from the law enforcement officials. And the fact that he is a gay black man seems to be pretty important to him being given that consideration. So anyway, this is where the real privilege comes in. Real privilege comes from being somebody that's very well connected on the political left. If you're looking for privilege in this country, that would be where I'd start, because this is a pretty clear example of it. All right, so it looks like we are about to wind down on time, so we're going to jump straight into the chaplain's report, and then we're going to get out of here. So let's go on now to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today, I'm actually going to do a repeat of the Chaplain's Report from the other day because we had a technical issue and I was told that most people couldn't listen to it. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what we did Monday, in the Gospel of John, verses 12 through 24. And all you really need to know about this is that Christ he sees an opportunity for a teaching moment here with his disciples. Because there are people that are questioning him. This is not far from his resurrection. And this is a time where he's having to prepare his disciples. You guys are going to have to make some sacrifices if you want to be my follower. And this is one of the ways that he chooses to sort of display that. And we'll look in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 24 through 26, where Jesus says here, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates life in this world will keep life eternal. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. Where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him." One of the reasons that I really love this passage, and I think that it's just so incredibly important, is that when you're looking at this analogy, and I guess because I have an ag background, I have a soft spot for some of the agricultural analogies that Jesus uses. What he's trying to convey to them is that you are going to have to give up your own will if you want to be made into a new creature, if you want to be fruitful. And he uses a grain analogy, and I love that because grain is so small. And the wheat that he's talking about here, he's saying if it falls to the earth and it doesn't sprout, in other words, unless the seed ceases to exist, then it's just a seed in the ground. That's all it is. It's not helping anybody. It's not providing nourishment to anyone. It's just a seed in the dirt. And it's not really doing any good. It says, but if you want to be my disciple, you have to be willing to lose your life. And when a seed loses its life, in other words, when a seed is destroyed and ceases to exist, it transforms into a stalk. And that stalk can produce a lot of wheat, several different grains, which then all have the potential to go off and bear fruit themselves. And so this analogy that he's giving here, he's saying if you want to follow me and you want to follow God, you have to be willing to lose your own life. You have to be willing to say to God, Father, I trust you. I have faith in you. I know you want good things for me. And because of that, I'm turning over my will, even my desires that aren't necessarily selfish or sinful. I'm turning over everything to you. Do with me what you will. And once you do that, then you can start becoming productive. Then you can start being a part of a spiritual family. Not only a spiritual family that includes God and Christ, but also a spiritual family that includes your brothers and sisters. Because you'll notice in that verse, what Jesus talks about is, if you don't give up your life, you're just there alone. But what happens when that grain of wheat grows up into a stalk? Well, then there's lots of grains all around him. And so it's no longer alone. It's doing something. It's being productive. and it is with other grains. And in the same sense, he's using this analogy to say that's what we really need to model our life after, that we give up ourselves, we give up our own will, we give up our own desires, and trust that God is going to do the right thing, and that's how he makes us fruitful. That's how he brings us closer to him, closer to our brothers and sisters, and closer to Christ. And if we are willing to lose our life, what we get back, what God gives us in return, is so much greater than the sacrifice that we're making. Because we sacrifice a little, and God sacrifices a lot. And we are the beneficiaries of that exchange. All we're giving up is our old sinful lifestyle, the old sinful man, and giving up our own desires that will lead us to destruction if we let them. But once we turn that over to God, God finds a way to make us productive and to make us somebody that can be admired, somebody that has fellowship with one another, and can make us a more moral person. Because God wants us to accomplish what he designed us to do, what he wanted us to accomplish. We are designed with a specific purpose, and once we give up our life over to God, we can start fulfilling that purpose finally. That's the kind of life that our Savior wants us to have. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.